Mitchell.
Here.
Mr. Anderson.
Here.
Here.
Very good. Thank you. Moving on to approval of the agenda.
So move.
Second. It's moved and seconded for the approval of the agenda. Are there any additions or corrections or discussion? Candy, please collect the vote.
Mr. Ewing.
Yes.
Mr. Hoffman.
Yes.
Mr. Updike.
Yes.
Mrs. Mitchell.
Yes.
Mr. Anderson.
Yes.
Approved.
Please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you, board members. Thank you out in the audience. Appreciate you being here this evening. Appreciate when people come in. Moving on to good news recognitions and announcements. Dr. Luttrell.
Yes, we have a couple of recognitions that I would like to do this evening. That couple individuals that we recognized last month, some of their other honorees were not able to be in attendance. And one of those individuals is with us this evening and was the recipient back in the fall of one of our USD230 Horizon Award winners, which recognizes outstanding service and showing a lot of great continued potential as a first, second, early career entry-level teacher. And this evening, we would like to bring up to the front and recognize from the I believe the middle school of Woodland Spring, Cooper Allison. So let's get her. Picture?
Sure, I'll be in the picture again.
Awesome. Zach is going to come up and get a picture. Our director of communications is under the weather this evening. And so, and again, Zach will have a part of our USD 230 staff, and hopefully she'll stay for many years. Hopefully we're gonna get centered. Perfect. Thank you. You want to say anything?
Thanks for having me.
And then we get to do it one more time because also last month, we recognized our actual elementary teacher of the year and secondary teacher of the year that will represent USD 230 in the state teacher of the year competition in 23. And last meeting, we recognized the elementary one was here, but the secondary one was not able to attend. So this evening, though, we're honored to have that individual in our presence. And at this time, we'd like to bring to the front Mrs. Emily Veer from Spring Hill High School. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Becky, you want to say that? You don't have to.
Just thank you again. I love my job. Ditto, but Allison.
Always fun to do those types of recognitions because again, the classroom teachers and our paraprofessionals, they are definitely the heart and soul of what makes our school district here at USD 230 so successful. Our short video, where we highlight different schools across the district in terms of what's happening. This evening, we're going to see a quick feature from Prairie Creek Elementary School. Principal there does a really good job, Mrs. Jody Cole. And so let's see what's happening. Now, this was done right before the holidays, so you're going to see a lot of references to a lot of the turkeys in that you ate last week. Enjoy.
We are so excited for our staff is amazing and our students are so great. And they are all excited for the holidays too.
Today we were doing a fun Thanksgiving activity where the kindergartners and the second graders got to come together to do a STEM project. So we watched the story Turkey Trouble, and their STEM project was to be able to create a trap to save the turkey for Thanksgiving. We had a lot of fun.
What I think is going well is kids' enthusiasm for always still wanting to come in, have a good time, have fun, take care of our business for the school day, and enjoy life.
So the fifth graders have been working on a Native American dwelling project, and they got to choose a tribe, and they got to research and learn more about the tribe and the dwelling that they lived in. And then they got to create and make some wonderful projects that they brought to class and presented to their classmates.
I feel like multiplication this year has really kicked off in third grade and they've been doing really well. And I feel like they're going to be multiplication stars someday. So
some of the great things that are happening at Prairie Creek this week are a lot of the activities that the teachers and the students have worked on. Another great thing about this week, there are only 2 days.
And that wraps up our good news, recognitions and announcements for this meeting.
Very good, thank you. It's always good and fun to celebrate Cooper and Emily and the accomplishments that you've had. We sure appreciate you being here and certainly the work that you're doing with our students. So thank you very much. Let's move on to business with individuals. Candy?
There were no cards.
No cards, all right. Moving on to the consent agenda, which consists of approval of the consent agenda items, which is approval of the minutes of the November 14th, 2022 meeting, approval of the minutes of the special meeting from November 19th, the clerk's report, treasurer's report, payroll and claims, and personnel. Also included is the request from the high school orchestra to take a trip out of state, and also the purchase of Forest Spring Middle School security cameras. Any questions or discussion or comments?
Do we need to put in the security camera, which bid we're going with? That it doesn't really, it's not. Am I reading that the same as you are? Or is it just the total? Assume it's the purple one.
It's the Electronic Technology Inc.
Okay.
And then it's the attachment.
Move we approve the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
It's moved in second for approval of the consent agenda as presented. Any final questions or comments? Candy, please collect the vote.
We'll begin the vote with Mr. Hoffman,
Yes.
Mr. Updike,
Yes.
Mrs. Mitchell,
Yes.
Mr. Anderson,
Yes.
Mrs. Milius,
yes,
Mr. Ewing,
Yes.
approved.
Very good, thank you. Moving on to discussion items. First discussion item is Forest Spring Middle School construction and opening update. Dr. Luttrell?
Yes, Mr. Tim Meek, our Director of Construction, is here, and I know you after our work session we had November 19th. Many of you were able to go over, and actually we got a firsthand tour of Forest Spring Middle School. Looks great, but again, there's still some work to be done. Tidying up a lot of the ordering, as you know, you approved security cameras. Now we're getting ready for furniture. So Mr. Meek's going to spend a few minutes just kind of covering in terms of what you're going to be seeing and some of the things that have to be done in the coming weeks. Mr. Meek.
All right. There's no formal report like there usually is because most of you had a firsthand picture of what's going on there. So I didn't think the pictures would do much good after you just saw it. So we are continuing on. We actually had some asphalt, the top coat of asphalt being put down today. Hopefully, we can get that done before the weather turns. They're gonna get our main parking lots done, but then they've got to go to another job before they can do the back parking lot. But they're trying to work us in because they had one day, but they've agreed to stay for a part of tomorrow to finish the parking lot they're working on. So we're trying to convince them just to stay while they're here and have the equipment here, but we'll see whether or not they're willing to do that. One thing we don't have is we don't have any liquidated damages. Some of the other jobs they have liquidated damages, and with the weather getting ready to turn, it's hard to get contractors to want to stay around and not pay liquidated damages to somewhere else if they have to. So we're trying to work to keep them here so that we can completely finish all the asphalt before the weather turns. But if that doesn't happen, we'll get it first thing in the spring if we don't get the one parking lot. So the one thing I really wanted to bring up tonight is a couple of things that you're going to see at the next meeting. One of them there, I've got the bid for musical instruments. That's not the bid. That is the bid documents. That doesn't have any pricing yet. The bid pricing will be back next Wednesday. So after that, we'll get that to you and in the board report. The other thing you'll see will be classroom furniture and building furniture for Forest Spring. We'll have that done. We have a meeting tomorrow to finalize everything. That will be done through contract bid. So through various each one of our different suppliers, companies as such, KI Furniture or Smith Systems Furniture, those that we normally do business with. Most of those have a national contracts that we'll be buying off of for that. So it's already pre-bid for us. So we don't have to do a hard bid. We're working with the School and Office Products, the same company out of Wichita that we worked with on the last, I don't know how many, I think it goes back to Prairie Creek, even when we first started working with them and the first time when Prairie Creek opened. So been very successful. They've got a great designer on staff that helps at no real additional charge for having the designer, because she's also the purchaser for them as well. So that's one of the major ones. Included in that will be 10 classrooms of furniture for Spring Hill Middle School. Spring Hill Middle School still has the same style of furniture that I had when I was in high school. That's not the same furniture, but it's the same style, the one-piece desk with the chair attached to it and everything. And so we're trying to bring part of their classrooms up, talking to Mr. Meek there. He wanted to start with 10 classrooms and get his teachers used to it. Some of them said, no, I don't want furniture. I like the way my room is now. So he's going to try to let them see what it's like. So we have a few other things, most of them that'll be coming around. Most of them probably aren't going to be at $20,000. So we won't have to bring them back to you for approval. Some orchestra instruments and things like that won't be at 20,000. We're working also with the high school on a new pole vault pit. That one's right at 20,000. If we can get them down where it's below, we won't have to do it. Bring it back to you, but it doesn't look like, I think I've got them down to their bottom dollar already, and it's going to be about 21,000 and something at this point. So I'll probably have to bring that back. It'll be on a GSA contract though. So again, we don't put it out for formal bid, but it'll be through the GSA contract. So really that's what I just want you to know. And I know Dr. Luttrell has talked about some of that being on the consent agenda for you to approve, but we'll see where you're at on that. And again, it's the same furniture as what we have at Woodland Springs. We're trying to keep it the same throughout the district, just as we do it at the elementary schools. We keep the same furniture there so that we can, if we have fluctuations between buildings or whatever, we need to pull some from one to another. Or if something breaks, we know exactly what it is. So, and what the contractor is. So.
Well, those furniture requests from Spring Hill Middle, is that coming out of the bond and interest, or is it coming?
That's going to be coming out of capital outlay.
Capital outlay.
It's real simple with the way they do their pricing to pull that out, and it'll be just an accounting deal for Doug to to pull it over and to charge it to capital outlay, so. We'll remind you that, and I think I may have said it before, that with the inflation we have and everything else going on, we are probably gonna hit the capital outlay for some of the FF&E stuff anyway. Just because we were originally gonna be done at least a year earlier than what we were with this building, and as you've seen what inflation's done, I feel real good that we're gonna get our building done for what we're doing when I see what other school districts are going through with their building projects of being well over budget, so. That's my quick report, so.
Thank you.
Candy, can you fix in the notes that August 2023 open?
2023.
Oh,
I got it.
I did, that's mine. That was 23, August 23. Yeah, that was mine. I added, still in me too.
No worries.
it's hard to roll over to another year. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Tim. And next item of discussion is driver's education fees for the summer of 2023. Dr. Luttrell?
Yes, driver education is offered, not part of during the school year, it's part of during, summer time. And every year that is a course that does a good service to a lot of individuals, saves parents a lot of stress probably. And so, but there is a fee for that. And every year about this time, the district looks at what the revenues they have, what they're projecting, and determines some fee structure for that. So Mr. Swin is going to, in the first of a couple that he's going to be talking here this evening, with the first one just about the driver education fees recommendation for the summer 2023.
Yes, good evening, board. I have looked at the numbers. Try not to raise fees unless there's a reason to. And after looking at the last few years, we've been pretty close to breaking even. It's not an exact science, but we spend approximately $55,000 for a summer's worth of driver's ed. And then depending on how many students we have, and the state aid that we get, that fluctuates quite a bit. Typically we get about that much in revenue. So I've looked at the numbers. We're currently carrying a cash balance of about 10,000, but the state does owe us state aid payment for last summer's driver's ed, which would put us about 23,000, which is a decent. You don't want to be carrying a whole lot of money in driver's ed. So I feel like that's a good cash balance. What was interesting was the numbers were down a little bit this past summer. I really don't know why, because our class sizes are going up. It could just be a 1-year thing. But I would anticipate probably a little over 100 students doing driver's ed this coming summer. It was important to know we went many years, more than 20 years of not raising the driver's ed instructor rate. It was at $25 an hour. Mr. Pope brought that to our attention and asked that, if we could maybe help the young guys out. He wasn't worried too much about himself, but we talked about that probably back in May, I think it was, and we did raise that rate to $30 an hour to help them out. I know they put a lot of hours in taking care of the kids. So after looking at how we compare to other districts and how we're doing on an annual basis, I really didn't see a need to increase the fees this year. So it would be my recommendation to go ahead and keep them at the $270 for in-district students and $400 for out-of-district. And I will tell you, I can't remember the last time we had an out-of-district student take driver's ed with us. So with that, I'll stand for questions if you have any.
Not a question, but that's pretty impressive that we don't have to raise rates on that because everything else is going way up and
Yeah.
it's well worth the money in my opinion. So.
And it does help now. And I forgot to mention, this is our 6th year with our own fleet. So it used to be very expensive to try to find a car dealership willing to rent us driver's ed cars. There's quite a bit of liability there. So since we own our own fleet, we can kind of choose how much of that cost we assign to driver's ed. So it kind of helps save us some money there. And as a result, we're able to keep rates the same. So.
Moving on to our third discussion item. It's the elementary and secondary school emergency relief 3 application.
Yes, the ESSER funds that were flowed to school districts across the country since near the beginning of the pandemic. The final round 3 application, there's a time frame to allocate those funds. Again, different districts have done it differently, but Mr. Swin is going to, again, give just a brief update as to the status and the process utilized in developing that ESSER 3 application. And he is going to try hard to not go on any lengthy talk about how, again, this was not a process where every district was treated the same. And in fact, there were a lot of districts that got treated a lot kinder than Spring Hill, but he's going to refrain from that. But go ahead, Doug.
I will do my best to be politically correct. Yes. It is true. When you look at how the money was distributed, we got the short end of the stick. I think I mentioned at a prior board meeting, had we just received the national average, just the national average, we would have $9 million more to spend right now. So that is a huge, huge number. Far more than we're getting between ESSER 1, ESSER 2, and ESSER 3 combined. In fact, the 3 pots of money combined is just under $4 million. So almost 2.5 times if we would have just got the national average. But I don't want to go there. Tonight, we need to focus on our ESSER 3 application. There is a deadline of December 16th. I did share a copy of the application. There's 13 questions that we have to answer. I don't have all the wording finalized yet, so I didn't want to share it with you with it not being quite complete. But essentially, we just describe where the money's being spent. And I thought tonight I would hit those highlights. ESSER 3 can be broken into 2 pots of money. There is the direct allocation that was determined by the formula that the feds used. And thankfully, we owe a big thanks to our state. They realized that there were some districts very low on the distribution list. And so they made a decision to take part of the money and redistribute it to districts that were under $600 per student to get them to $600 per student. So there is almost $1 million in direct allocation, but thanks to the state getting us up to $600 per pupil, we got a little over another almost 1.1 million in per student allocation to put those 2 together. So almost $2 million is what we're spending with ESSER 3 funds. It was by far and away the biggest pot of money of the 3. And I did include an Excel spreadsheet, which gives you a line item breakdown for those that love to look at numbers, and which I do, and we'll show where that money's going. But to summarize, there was 3 main categories. First of all, we knew there was going to be learning loss, and that was the main focus of the ESSER 3 funds. And so we did hire 7 reading and math interventionists to hone in and focus on those kids needing the most help. It was a pretty significant investment that we made this past year. And so we're going to use ESSER 3 funds to continue to fund those positions the current year and then also the following year. The second biggest allocation of ESSER 3 funds would be just retention incentives for staff. Part of negotiations a year ago, well, it's been more than a year ago, we decided to give everybody, all the certified staff, $500 each in a one-time payment. And then we paid our support staff $50 per month up to 10 months so that they could also receive $500 if they're working the full year. We knew sometimes there's turnover in certified or support staff, and they needed to be working each month in order to qualify for that payment. The current year, we did increase that to $600 in premium pay. And there is money allocated into next year as well We don't know exactly what that amount's going to be, depending on how many staff we hire. We do have a new building open, so there's a little fine tuning in the numbers, but we have premium pay designated for all 3 years. And last, but certainly not least, we did make an investment in the Fast Bridge software, which is designed to help determine needs of individual students and also help us to intervene and get them the support they need so they can, each and every kid can succeed. So there's a quick overview. You can look at the Excel spreadsheet if you want to get in line item details. And we will have the completely worded ESSER 3 application available at the next board meeting to take final action. And then it goes to the state, and the deadline is December 16th. And I will tell you that not always is your application approved after you submit it to the state. There's usually a little bit of back and forth is what other districts have told me. But the good news is they've allowed about 3 months worth of back and forth, fine tuning it to where they want to make sure our application is complete. It follows the guidelines so that if the IRS ever comes in and audits us, that we won't have any troubles with that, and we won't have to return any funds, which quite honestly, what we're spending it on is not controversial at all. So I don't anticipate any problems there, but we do want to get the wording right in the event we would be audited. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you might have regarding ESSER 3.
So it really appears that pretty much all this money is going back into students, the staff and students. And
Staff
so
and students.
if districts got like copious amounts of money, what did they spend it on? I mean, was it spent on?
Can I tell you some of the really wild ones?
Sure.
Because I've been watching. I know one district, not in Kansas, so I've been looking at national. I've been curious. I know one district was spending $90,000 on support dogs. One district bought massage chairs for all their teacher lounges. And then one district, to help with social distancing, built an outdoor amphitheater so that people could be socially distanced and be outside and have fresh air. So there's some crazy things that people spent money on. I'm sure there's going to be some people go to jail over this. It won't be Spring Hill, though. I can tell you that.
It's good news.
Yes.
Any questions for Mr. Schwinn?
The spreadsheet's well done. There's a lot on there. Surprising how much of it goes right back to the government and taxes. A lot.
I didn't realize our interventionists are paid out of these funds, but it looks like we have it planned for a while. What happens in 2025?
Great question. We can probably, there's a couple options there. One, my hope is that we can slowly build up cash balances to better absorb that in a couple of years. We have seen an increase in our at-risk funds, and these positions would qualify as a good use for those funds. So if our free and reduced population continues to increase, those funds go up and we can dedicate some money there. So we've got a couple options. And two, just knowing that as we prepare the next couple budgets, that we're careful not to hire more than we need to. You know, we want us to be staffed properly, but not overstaffed to where we dig too deep into our budget. So it is something we're watching. Thankfully, it's not a ginormous amount of money that we're going to have to absorb. So we do have some time to kind of wean ourselves off. So I don't see it as a huge financial cliff that we have to avoid.
Any other questions or comments? Moving on to student assessment report, part 3, Dr. Luttrell.
Yes, the last couple of meetings, we've had two other sections of this student assessment report. The first report that Dr. Smith and I gave focus simply on how our students performed on the spring assessment, the Kansas spring assessment in 22 in math, language arts, and science, and just looked at how we performed with state average. You saw we do very well. Last month, we decided to also, or earlier this month, we decided to focus part 2 simply on looking at how do our students, because when you see our district averages, because of our district has the virtual school, even though it's ours in name, we do not have a lot of control over those students because they are all over the state of Kansas and have a staff through the virtual school. They're not really coming to us each and every day. So, well, they're not coming at all. So anyway, we want to see, even though the state of Kansas reports us as if they were here, we look to see how do our scores look, and we actually look at the brick and mortar students that come every day here on campus. How do they compare then to state averages again? And that looked very strong. And then this evening, we're going to take it a step further. And again, very briefly, Dr. Smith is going to walk you through, and we're going to take now that brick and mortar performance percentages in math, language arts, and science as a district, and look to see, because when you think state average, yeah, that's good, but you want to drill that down further, and we're going to look at simply how give that more of that broader, more of a narrow lens, and look to see how do our students, brick and mortar students, perform against other brick and mortar students, maybe from like within Miami County, the Frontier League, Johnson County. And so Dr. Smith put this brief presentation together. Again, and again, it's not identifiable by school district, but I did give you a little bit. It's not a cheat sheet, but it's a list of comparison schools that if you want to pull that up and you want to refer to it as she goes through some of the data, it'll kind of help you to know the group that we're showing you in that particular comparison. So Dr. Smith, go ahead.
Thank you. Good evening. So we'll take a look tonight at how Spring Hill students are performing as compared to some of their peer groups within Johnson County, Miami County, schools that are part of the Frontier League. We'll look at some school districts that are within the boundaries of universities. So schools that have some opportunity to partner with area universities and common colleges that our students attend, and kind of give you some context just for how our students are performing in comparison to other students in groups that we often associate with for other activities. So this is just a quick comparison then of how Spring Hill students are performing as compared to Johnson County school districts. And as Mr. Schwinn shared, in the spirit of political correctness, we have coded the other school districts. So you'll see where Spring Hill ranks, but we have given the other school districts just kind of District A, District B, in the event that they would like to share their own data with their board and communities. So here you have the other Johnson County school districts, and this is for math, and then the state average there. And then you'll see Spring Hill is actually doing quite well in math as compared to their Johnson County peers. And so this is students who are performing at or above that level 3 in math.
And I think I told her I would not interrupt too much. But again, Kansas as a whole, I mean, every state assessment has its, wide range of scores, but there is also no doubt that Johnson County is one of the strongest academic counties in the state. So, I mean, you're looking at really good school districts here, and you can see our performance, while there's always room to improve, coming out of the pandemic, it's just one snapshot, but pretty strong for math.
Yes, Johnson County does perform very well in comparison to other school districts across the state. And that holds true for English language arts. So here you have your other Johnson County schools, your state average, and then where Spring Hill Schools falls within that comparison group. And so you see we actually perform quite well there. And then we do very well in science. So these are our students in grades 5, 8, and 11. Science is only tested at 3 grade levels. So they're doing quite well. Just slightly below that top district. And because we do serve students who are in Miami County, we wanted to look at that comparison group as well. And then we participate in a number of activities as a member of the Frontier League. So we consider this a peer group for us. So in math, see, there's that state average. So we have some districts in this case that are above that state average, some that are just a bit below. And Spring Hill doing very well in this comparison group in math. For ELA, it looks very similar. You'll see that state average kind of in the middle there. And then Spring Hill performing close to the top again. And in science, we're also second out of that comparison group. So we maintain pretty high performance among our school districts within Miami County and the Frontier League. We also looked a little bit at school districts who are in cities where there is a major college or university that our students would likely apply and attend, thinking about how they would fare competitively against other students who may be applying for these same colleges. So you can see our students are performing really well. We have some who are below and above that state average. That state average is kind of in the middle with this comparison group. But in math, our students are at the top of this performance group. And that holds true for English language arts as well. Our students outperform this comparison group. And the same for science. Doing well. And then we also just wanted to look too closely at neighboring counties. So we looked at Johnson County, we looked at Miami County, but we also enjoy some collegial relationships and networking with neighbors to the north a little bit. So we looked at some other counties, including Wyandotte County, Leavenworth County, just to kind of see, again, for groups that we interact with regularly, we work with on our academic programs, how would we kind of fare for schools who are working with similar goals and initiatives in mind. And you can see state average. We've got some who are falling a little below that state average, some who are performing well above. And in this comparison group within math, we are at the top of that group. And that continues to be the case for English language arts. And then for science. So hopefully that just provides a little context. Obviously we kind of talked a lot about how we compare in regards to Spring Hill School students versus just the state of Kansas, and our students are doing quite well. They're above state averages. We talked about our different academic programs, students who are learning virtually versus those who are attending at a brick and mortar attendance center. But hopefully some of this information too just puts into context school districts to school districts, districts that we're all really familiar with, that we work with often. We have similar academic programs. How are our students faring in comparison to like schools? Just to kind of give you an idea. And our students are actually performing really well. So like Dr. Luttrell said, there's always room for growth and opportunity for improvement within our academic program, but our students are really performing quite nicely across all 3 different content areas: math, English language arts, and science. Are there questions I can answer about this data set or any of the other data that we've discussed?
Did I miss why Blue Valley was left out of the Johnson County data?
They're in there.
Oh, they are.
They are.
Which ones? What?
Okay. I only ask, it's not on our sheet.
Oh,
That's, yeah, sorry.
they are among the 6.
Oh, Johnson County.
There should have been one more entry there. Just good.
Oh, yeah.
That one.
They are on the chart though. Yeah,
Gotcha.
they are.
That explains the extra letter. I couldn't figure out where to go.
Who is that?
Yeah, that's just like 2022. That's my fault. No. But no, again, I think that's the data. Again, it's one snapshot. Of course, you want consistent. You don't want to make too many decisions ever on 1 year of data. But I mean, I think that I always say student performance, student achievement, any level, whether it's strong or whether it's poor, it doesn't just happen by chance. And you have strong academic achievement whenever there's a strong plan in place and you got a lot of people behind the scenes working together towards aligned goals. And that's one thing that, again, that I think definitely, as you've heard me say, I'm a firm believer in professional learning communities and that those collaborative Wednesdays. And like I said, that's in my superintendent's report. We talk a little bit about the PLC survey we're giving out. But again, the initiative that we have going in the district now for the 4th year of the PLC, don't kid yourself and think that does not play a role in terms of student achievement, because that time is solely for focus on student learning, not teacher ability, improving their ability. It's focused on what the needs of the student are. And hopefully you're starting to see. And then the other thing I hope you take away, and Dr. Smith will admit, she gets excited now when she looks at it this from a standpoint of, you saw the figures where we were maybe not at the top, but we're right on the heels. And that's the type of stuff when we roll this out eventually and continue to take it down to the principals, down to the teachers. That's what's going to motivate them. Okay. Cause they're competitive people. They want to be the best, and they'll take that. They're already doing, they'll take that data and they'll start getting behind it and figuring out, putting names to those numbers. And that's what it's all about. And that's what I've hoped you see now. I've told you from day one is that I wanted to get you all into a habit of being able to see the data in a lot of different forms so that you learn the language. And then every year throughout, we're going to probably at least 5 or 6 times a year, at least, I want to put data like this in front of you so that you can, again, see the impact that our other initiatives, FastBridge, whether it be, the PLCs, we feel is having on our student achievement. Thank you, Dr. Smith. Any other questions? But our teachers and students deserve them. And they're the ones that perform.
It's interesting. Depending on how you slice the data, the outcomes you get. It's well done. I think it's good to have more of a insight into what the data can tell us and what decisions we can make based on those analyses.
I thought the numbers in the school districts and cities with universities, that was surprising.
It's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Now, again, as I said, it's 1 year.
Right.
It's not a trend yet.
So, like I said, ideally, as I've told Dr. Smith, ideally, next year, we'll have 2 years of data and we'll do a 2-year average. And then ideally, 3 years, there's no science to it, making decisions with it. But ideally, if you have 3 good data years to look at, that's when you can really start determining long-term impacts of things. But it does also give you one thing I think you noticed with our data and you really start looking at some of those other schools that are assigned, districts that are assigned numbers, our scores, whether it was English, math, or science, were pretty consistent in terms of percentage. You didn't see a lot of big spikes in one area. And remember, a lot of those are grade level tests. Okay, so which shows in of itself, overall, we must have from this year, have fairly good alignment in terms of we're teaching what is approved, and then we're assessing that, and it's putting our positions in kids in a position to do well. Although, as I said, there's that data though, again, it's lots of room for improvement across the board, not only Spring Hill, but Kansas and across the nation. But again, it shows that, again, our staff and students do have a focus on teaching and learning.
Well, it gives us a foundation, right? It gives us a baseline to start from. Any other questions or comments? Thank you. There you are. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Smith.
No other questions. Moving on to discussion regarding rural housing incentive district partnership with the city of Spring Hill.
Okay, we had a work session on the 19th, and one of those items that was discussed, we had representatives from the city of Spring Hill come and spend a couple hours with us, along with the developer, about a possible partnership they would like for us to enter with them in terms of some initiatives that would be felt would be good for not only the city of Spring Hill, but long-term positivity for the school district. And so we used that money to kind of have their information presented. Everybody could operate from the same frame of reference in terms of information that they had to help become to get insight. And then I want to bring back this evening and show our financial advisor that has worked with the district for many years, Greg Weirenberg from Raymond James, who I guess I've been working with him about 6-8 weeks on this project about telling us, getting us information as to what impact potentially might this project have, both, you know, whether it's a plus or whether it's a minus. And he has spent some time putting that information together. He's going to share that. And then if you want to ask some other questions, we also are fortunate this evening, just as we were at the work session, we have several representatives from the city council, the mayor, the city administrator are all here this evening. And I would hope that, again, after this discussion and some questions, we're closer as a board, y'all are closer to a board than to maybe coming to some type of a consensus or some direction on how you'd like to proceed with this. As we said, there is, you know, some calendar days involved in terms of whenever as terms the project proceeds or doesn't proceed. So this time I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Weirenberg. He'll give you his analysis on how he views this project. Thank you, Mr. Weirenberg.
Thank you. I appreciate the introduction and good evening, board members. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. You know, it's interesting to think I have been very fortunate to work with the district for quite a few years now on your bond issues, and that includes new bond elections, bond refinancings. But one of the things that I work with Doug pretty closely with each year is looking at the mill levy analysis. And there's a variety of factors that can impact where your mill levy is set in the bond and interest fund. We look at state aid, we look at assessed valuation growth, we look at interest rates, possible savings. And now we're looking at it with the possible RHID project in mind and seeing how does this impact the mill levy to not only repay the outstanding bonds, but we've included in just a couple of hypothetical future bond elections to show if you have future projects, what does the mill levy look like after we take a closer look at how an RHID project impacts the mill levy for the repayment of those bonds. And so one of the first things that we look at anytime we update a mill levy analysis is we look at the assessed valuation, and we looked at the state aid percentages, and we look at any changes that have occurred. And state aid has been changing over the years. Going back to 1992 is when they put the state aid formula in place. In 2015, they made some adjustments to how that was calculated. And you'll notice here on this slide, any bond elections prior to 2015, you're currently getting 52% state aid. Any bond elections that occurred after 2015, you're getting 12%. And then there were some recent changes on how virtual students are excluded from that calculation. Now any bond elections after July 1 of this year, you're looking at obviously a lower percentage, 0% state aid. But we also look at your assessed valuation growth, and we want to make some assumptions on what the future assessed valuation will look like. So we use history as a guide. You obviously have been a very rapidly growing school district, not only in a number of students, but in assessed valuation as well. You'll notice there the 10-year average, 12.28%, 14-year average, or 5-year average, 14.3%. And then this last year had a really nice increase in assessed valuation, 17.95%. So we use that historical information to help us make some assumptions moving forward. The historical tax levies really don't impact how or where we will set the mill levy in the bond and interest fund moving forward, but it's always interesting to look back at where you have been. Currently, you're at about 17.7 mills. We don't have the budget for this current fiscal year included or finalized yet, but you've been around 17 or 18 mills the last couple of years. Then you go all the way back to 2004, 2005, it was closer to 26.9 mils. The other piece of information that I added, this really doesn't impact your bond and interest fund, but it's interesting to look at the population that's occurred in Spring Hill. It's a little tougher to get the population numbers for a school district, but we went and pulled some of that information. Looks like the city population inside the boundaries of the city has been growing at about 282 people per year, or about a 5.2% growth rate each year. That population growth does have an impact on this next slide, where we look a little more closely at your state aid percentage. And it's interesting to note that state aid is based on our assessed valuation per pupil as compared to the statewide average assessed valuation per pupil. And so when they put this formula in place in 1992, and I'm speaking initially about the pre-2015 election percentage, the statewide average percentage of state aid was going to be 25%. And so every school district that had the same assessed valuation per pupil as the statewide average, that school district too would get 25%. Then as a district grows at a different pace than the statewide average, if you grow faster than the statewide average, for every $1,000 increase you have compared to the statewide average, you then lose 1 percentage point. So in other words, if you grow 1,000 assessed valuation per pupil faster next year than the statewide average, then you would go from 25% to 24%. Or the opposite holds true. If the state is growing at a faster pace than your district, then you're going to pick up that extra percentage point for every 1,000 differential. So when you think about the assessed valuation per pupil calculation, there's really the two components. It's where is your assessed valuation, but also where is your enrollment? And the best case for a school district, when you look at it purely from the state aid perspective, is that if you're seeing increases in assessed valuation, but you're also seeing strong increases in enrollment, then that's pushing your assessed valuation per pupil lower, and that's helping you get a higher percentage of state aid. So what we did here, and there's a lot of assumptions in these calculations, which is important to keep in mind. But we pulled data for the state of Kansas, and we're showing there in the middle column, the average, statewide average assessed valuation per pupil. And then the column second from the right, current USD230 Spring Hill. We ran this through our spreadsheet calculation just to see how close it would get to what you're currently getting. And if you recall on the previous slide that we walked through, the state aid percentage, you're currently getting 52%. This actually came very close. It was 51 point some percentage. And so you'll see there at the bottom of that second column from the right, based on your assessed valuation per pupil compared to the statewide average, it's actually calculating very close to that 52%. So the adjustment we made in that far right column, no other change except we added in, you'll see a line there, additional students from RHID project. And so we said, what happens if the new homes that are constructed result in 440 more students being enrolled in the district? What does that do to your assessed valuation per pupil? And then in turn, what does that do to the state aid percentage that you would get? So see the very bottom number there, instead of getting around 52% or 51% as shown in this spreadsheet, it would actually go up to about 56%. And again, no other changes other than just adding students. What does that do to your state aid percentage? So then, and the adjustments that were made in 2015 and then the further adjustments that were made in 22, it's a little tougher to predict where your assessed valuation per pupil will settle out relative to how that formula was revised to be calculated in 2015. I don't think you would see a 4 or 5% increase on your bond elections after 2015, but you may see a 1 or 2 percentage point increase, or it may help you see it avoid a decrease in that state aid percentage. But to put that in perspective, if there's a 4 or 5 percentage point increase in your state aid, then that generates about $365,585 of additional state aid. And when you look at that relative to where your assessed valuation is right now, that is about a 0.91 mil levy equivalent. So just adding students can help you get more state aid. That can help take some pressure off that mill levy in the bond and interest fund. And just on that pre-2015 bonds that you have outstanding, it would be about 0.9 mils. You'd probably get some additional state aid on the elections after 2015. Again, that may be closer to 1% or 2%. So maybe you're looking at, maybe a $0.25 mil for your bond elections after 2015. So the other piece then that we look at is, and that's focusing on the state aid side of the equation. The other part of the equation is assessed valuation. If you have an improvement project in the district and that property goes onto the tax rolls, then that increases the assessed valuation. The more assessed valuation you have, those bond payments are spread over a larger tax base, and that in turn can help reduce the mill levy in your bond and interest fund. So we didn't, these next two slides, and I apologize, it's very small print. But the next two slides, what we've done is we have shown a sample mill levy analysis that takes all of your outstanding bonds and then also adds in we just picked 2 amounts in 2 years to have possible bond elections. So we said, what if the district has a bond election in 2025 for 30 million? And then what if you have a large project a few years later, you have a $100 million project in 2027? Again, not suggesting that that's in the plans, but we wanted to see not only on the outstanding bonds, but if you have future projects, what does that mill levy look like in those scenarios? So we kept state aid at 52%, and your state aid percentage came down this last year. So we're actually showing a decline by 5% in your pre-2015 state aid. Your current state aid for bond elections after 2015 is 12%. We're showing a decline there of 1%. And then we're showing an assessed valuation growth of 15% for a few years, then 12, and then 9%. The assumptions in both of these analyses are the same. The only change between the two is in the second spreadsheet that I'll show you in a second. We added in the potential assessed valuation that would be generated from the new homes built in an RHID project. And what we're trying to show or really isolate is what happens to the mill levy in your bond and interest fund if we just say status quo on the assessed valuation and you continue to grow without factoring in any new homes being built in that RHID. And then in the second scenario, we're showing if you were able to count that assessed valuation immediately from that RHID project, what would happen to the mill levy? And so I know, again, it's really small print. I apologize for that, but the end result is when you compare the mill levies on these two scenarios, what you'll see is that there's not a dramatic difference. But in the year, for example, 2020, in the year 2027, if we are able to include the assessed valuation from the RHID project, the mill levy we were showing would be 24 mils. Without that valuation from the RHID project, it's 25 mils. So there's a 1 mil lower difference if we could count immediately that assessed valuation from the RHID project. That holds true for several years. If you look at kind of a 10-year period there's about a 1 mil lower difference resulting from that assessed valuation in the RHID project. And then as you get closer to the end of the repayment of the bonds, both scenarios, you end up kind of dropping down, from 14 mils to 10 to 8, and then kind of settles out at about 6 mils. So what we took from this analysis is that on the benefit side, an RHID project, additional students coming in, that could actually help increase your state aid percentage, maybe by close to a 1 mil levy. But then on the other side, by not being able to count that assessed valuation from the new homes in the RHID, that's the negative side of the equation. That oddly enough is about a 1 mil differential as well. So the two would tend, if we took the projected increase in state aid and ignored the assessed valuation from the RHID project, I think it would have a fairly neutral impact or close to neutral impact on your mill levy and the bond and interest fund. So I know that's a long-winded, complicated way to say that end result is that the two tend to offset each other. And if the homes being built will result in students coming in, then there could be a benefit in your bond and interest fund from that higher state aid percentage. And then obviously the benefit to not only the school district, but all of the other taxing entities is when the development agreement dollar amount is reached and you're able to kind of sunset the RHID, if you will, then that property does come on the tax rolls of the district and you see the full benefit at that point. I'm sure through your work sessions, you've had it explained to you the funds that are captured. It's the general fund and the capital outlay fund are exempted from being captured. This analysis this evening really just focuses in on the bond and interest fund levy. And we wanted to walk you through kind of how we were seeing that impact and make sure you had this information. So I hope that's helpful, but I'll stop there and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
On the, when you assumed, I think it was 400 students, 400 students. You could go up 2 or 3 slides to where the number of students that were 140. Is that's assuming the total number of students at the end of the project, right? 67 homes, I think, and 1.2 something students per home. So it's at the end of that. I think there was 4 phases. There's 2 years to a phase. So at the end of the 8th year, this would be the result at the end of the 8th year.
Yeah, very good point. This is really more a snapshot at the end rather than because as those homes are built, obviously not 440 students are not coming in on day one or immediately. But as those students are enrolled at the district, then that helps kind of move the state aid percentage in your favor.
The assessed valuation is not going to go up significantly until the end of the project either, right? It'll go up incrementally too.
Correct.
As the homes are being built and the value recorded. So
Yeah, and the spreadsheets that we're showing, they do show the assessed valuation increasing gradually over time. And again, it's that blue shaded column, third from the left. We're showing in the year 2025 about 1.4 million of assessed valuation, and then it takes several years to grow up to and stabilize at around the $14-15 million level. And then we've assumed that it'll just be reappraised and kind of grow slowly from there.
Excuse me. How did you come around to the annual growth rate numbers?
Pardon me?
How did you estimate the growth rate numbers?
On the assessed valuation?
Yeah, but it goes from 11 to 18 and then to 15.
Yeah, so they're at the top part of that page. Those are actual growth rates. And so you can see through the year 2023, through the year 2023, those are actual percentages. And then this past year you had 17.95% growth. So we decided just to continue at a percentage similar to that. So we're showing 15% for 2 years, then kind of tapering that down 12% for 3 years, and then 9% every year thereafter. Honestly, this is a challenge that Doug and I have every year. It's like, well, we think,
Yes.
okay, we ought to start tapering it down at some point, but you've had such solid growth. It's been double-digit growth for a long time. But those are just numbers that we pulled out of the air thinking, okay, growth will continue, and then we'll just show it a little slower pace in some of those future years.
Just to clarify, I think I understand this, but can you put in English when you say it's captured, not captured, it's retained? Just will the district collect money for capital outlay? Yes or no? Will the district collect capital or general fund? Yes or no? Can you just go through those?
Yeah, so and I think of 4 primary funds for most school districts. I think you have extraordinary growth and maybe a couple of others that you periodically levy. But if you just focus on those 4 primary funds, the general fund levy is always set at 20 mils. And I like to think of that as it's levied locally, but then it's immediately transferred to the state and then redistributed statewide through the school finance formula. So those dollars are not being kept locally anyway. So those dollars are not being captured and they're being, continue to be sent to the state of Kansas.
So Greg, just when you say captured,
Yes.
they're not being captured. That means they're not gathered up by their RHID.
Yeah,
They're they don't go into the RHID.
That's
Is that
good
fair?
question, and that's probably the best place to start is what do I mean by captured?
Yeah.
So if you think if I build a home and it's inside the boundaries of the RHID, I'm getting the tax bill with the same levy rates as everybody else. But the real question is, where do those dollars go? And so when you focus on the school district levy, if I'm living outside the boundaries of an RHID, all of those tax dollars flow to the county clerk, and then the county clerk will distribute those to where they're supposed to end up. Doug, correct me, do you collect the 20 mils and then immediately send it to the state, or does the county just send it directly?
Goes directly from the county to the state.
Yeah, so the 20 mils is going, you never see that, it goes directly to the state. All of the other funds are going to be sent by the county clerk to the school district. Now, if I live inside the boundaries of the RHID, I'm still paying the same mill levy rate. And again, the only difference is where do those dollars go? So the 20 mils, that will be the same. It will go to the county clerk. The county clerk will see that that is tax coming from inside the boundaries of an RHID. That 20 mils is not being intercepted or captured. And so that is sent on to the state, just like anybody outside the boundaries of the RHID. So then the other 3 funds, you've got the local option budget, the capital outlay, and the bond and interest fund. The capital outlay fund levy, which you're currently at 8 mils, that is not being intercepted or captured and being retained to be used to pay for some of the development costs or infrastructure inside the RHID. So that those 8 mils will go to the county clerk and then be transferred to the district, just the same as if you were outside the boundaries of the RHID. So you're really down to the other 2 funds, the local option budget and the bond and interest fund. And the way that RHIDs are set up is that those dollars are paid by the taxpayer inside the boundary of the RHID. Once they're sent to the county clerk will then look and say, these dollars came from inside the RHID, and the county clerk is then directed to, I believe, send those on to a bond trustee or really to the RHID to be used to pay for the infrastructure cost. So those dollars are what I consider captured or intercepted. They're not sent to the district. They're actually used to pay for those infrastructure costs as part of the development agreement inside that RHID. So does that help answer your question?
Is that the same also for the LOB?
Same for the LOB. I'm sorry. Yeah, bond and interest fund and LOB are the 2 captured funds or intercepted funds.
Well, while we're on that, I know that there is a time limit. We've talked about the cap. If we hit the cap before the time limit, no one has ever said what the cap is, what that amount is.
Yeah, I believe there's we can let the city or.
That may be one of you guys' questions.
Yeah, I know there's a statutory limit of a 25-year period, but I think most projects are set up to where there's an agreed upon amount of infrastructure cost. And once you capture enough revenues to meet that amount, you either stop the RHID intercept at when you reach that dollar amount or when you reach 25 years, one of those two. And so I don't know if the city, if that's
And good evening, board members. I'm Tyler Ellsworth. I'm a public finance attorney with the Kutak Rock Law Firm, and we're the city's bond counsel. And so we've been working on the city's behalf to put the RHID proceedings in place and also negotiate a development agreement between the city and the developer. And so to answer the question, in this particular case, while RHIDs can have a maximum 25-year term under the statute, we are in the process of finalizing our development agreement, but we're zeroing in on an 18-year maximum term and a dollar amount. And the dollar amount is a little bit nuanced. The developer's reimbursement is in the range of $17 million to $18 million to reimburse them for certain of their infrastructure expenses. The other component of the RHID increment here will be to reimburse certain of the city's debt service because the city will issue general obligation bonds to pay for a portion of the Webster Road extension. So total, that's probably around $21 or $22 million. So that would be the dollar cap. So the way this is set up is precisely as Mr. Varenberg just described. There's a dollar cap and there's a time limit. And so if the dollar cap for reimbursement occurs prior to the 18-year term running, then the RHID is terminated and the taxes are no longer captured by the RHID and instead flow as they normally do.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah.
any further questions?
I've got a question. It seems that the district about breaks even, but what does that mean to our individual taxpayers? If we end up having to build a new school for this area, does that impact the rest of our taxpayers?
Yeah, and that's one of the key questions we are trying to analyze as part of this analysis. And and we broke it, we separated the two components. What is the mill levy to repay not only the outstanding bonds, but then we had those two hypothetical examples that we included in there, $30 million and $100 million project. What would the mill levy look like, both with and without the assessed valuation of the RHID? But then we also kind of separately analyzed because we wanted to see on a standalone basis just what's the impact of with and without the assessed valuation. But then we also did that separate analysis of how much additional state aid would you get. The primary impact on the additional state aid seems to be coming from your pre-2015 bond elections. The assumption that we used on any future bond elections after 2022 is that you're currently getting 0%. And even if you add 440 students, we just assumed, okay, that's not going to pull us up into where we're getting a positive percentage. It's not impossible that you could pick up, 1, 2, 3 percentage points if you have enrollment increases, but we assumed 0 moving forward. So this analysis kind of does address your question of if you have future bond elections because of growth in the district, both inside and outside the RHID, what does that do to all of the taxpayers? And on a assessed valuation only perspective, it may be about a 1 mil differential. But for a few years, while we still have some of those pre-2015 bonds outstanding, it could actually give you a little more state aid than what you're getting. May not be a full mill levy, but so it could be maybe a half to a mill at most differential for the existing taxpayers. So I don't know if that helps answer your question, but that is again, what we were trying to address is what does this do to the district at large in terms of the mill levy and state aid and how those two offset each other.
Thank you.
What are the impacts to the district with the local option budget being captured? Doug, I think it's to you. I'm not sure. It might be to Grant.
Yeah, we don't get the LOB dollars from that's going to go into the RHID, not to the district.
Right. And what is that impact?
The dollars we're
For the
missing out
18
on.
years or whatever it is.
I don't have a specific dollar figure there.
That's okay.
I don't know if we have anything that breaks that out. I mean, we're just going to put together our budget knowing that that assessed valuation isn't part of it. So.
And it's would be specific only to the RHID area.
Right.
That we would not receive the local option budget.
Relatively speaking, it would be a small portion.
Okay.
And just to clarify, the RHID capturing portion is just the increase from what the current assessed valuation is to what the improved assessed valuation is. So you'd still get what we're getting now off of it, if there's anything.
Yeah, where it's at today, we would still capture. We're just not benefiting from the increase.
Right.
We do benefit from the increase though in capital outlay. That's important to note. So that is additional money that would be flowing into us from the project.
And Doug, to maybe help answer the question on the LOB, and this is dangerous because I'm doing the math, while we're here, but
Yeah.
if you have 14 million in assessed valuation, and right now your LOB levy is right around 10 mils, give or take. I think you've been at 9, but it can fluctuate quite a bit one year to the next. So it would be what, 140,000 in
third of
local dollars, and then you're probably getting 50-60% state aid.
Right.
So, 225, 250,000 impact on the LOB.
Yeah.
Maybe closer to 200.
We're not actually losing LOB dollars. We're just not gaining the LOB dollars. So as the rest of the assessed valuations going up, just like we were projecting, the 15% for a couple of years, 12%, we're getting LOB on all that. It's just this project that would be exempt.
Right, and just having to spend money on the students that would come out of the area.
Right.
I got one last question. I don't think it's for you, Greg. It's for guys from this city. Looking back at the map, they have the shaded part that they're not, there's a little bit of a discussion yet of what you're going to put in there. And that is part of the RHID. If those are like condos or apartments, that's two different things. I'm assuming a condo would be privately owned. So then you would have tax revenue from an individual. If it's apartment buildings, then it's rental real estate. Do you tax that as commercial? Do you tax that as private? Can anybody answer that one?
Yeah, happy to take an attempt at that. I think, it would really go to the owner. If it's privately owned condo, then the tax bill is going to go to that private owner. If it's a developer owned or a company owned apartment building, it's not, the tax bill isn't sent to the apartment owner, it's sent to the property owner. So I think you'd still have taxes. It's just, is it split up?
I guess I'm asking, is that commercial? Does that make it commercial if it's rentals? That I don't know that answer. You're
Yeah.
saying no?
I don't,
It's taxed as residential then? Okay.
Any other questions, discussion?
Still some things to noodle through. At least for me.
Yeah, a lot of things to think about through, a lot of good information. It doesn't, from my own perspective, I was expecting a larger impact to the mill levy. And I don't see that it's there really. And at least in the scenario that you put together, it's a 1 mil benefit compared to not having the RHID. I hear that right? Okay.
yeah, that's correct.
I think Nell's assessment of it's pretty much break even. It's
Yeah, I guess my one question is, you looked at around 400 students for all the housing. If the high density area brought in another 400, are we talking it's still roughly break even? It's maybe it's 2 mills now and up, and 2 mills cap extra from the state or something like that. Or...
Yeah, obviously, if you have more students, then you think back to that slide on the state aid calculation, then you're going to have a lower assessed valuation per pupil. That's going to give you, an even higher impact on your state aid percentage. But again, that's for the pre-2015 bonds, and those are outstanding until the year 2031. So that's where you'd see the most benefit from higher enrollment. And then some of your later bond elections, for example, we have bonds outstanding all the way out to 2039. And when you get past 2031, those are all elections that occurred 2015 to 2022. That's where you're at 12% right now. And maybe if you had 400 students or maybe 800 students, instead of 12%, it might be 13 or 14 or 15, or, the worst part about that post 2015 adjustment is that we see a lot of school districts where that state aid percentage is dropping 1% a year. And so maybe you don't see an increase, maybe you just can hold, which is still a benefit. But it's not as easy to calculate as the pre-2015. And that's why we weren't able to really calculate what that impact would be. But the more students you have, it does help hold up or maybe even increase that state aid percentage. And again, we picked 440 students because I think Rob Schwartz and some of RSP numbers, maybe average student per home was like 1.1 or 1.2. So that's how we arrived at that number. But if it is housing that would have higher students, then you could see higher enrollment and higher state aid as a result.
Thank you.
So as we're looking at this, we're just looking at the 400, what this very small visual in our district is doing, just this one area adding. We're not looking at all of the other areas that are also bringing in students.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, we're in this analysis, we're really trying to isolate what's the impact of an RHID project. There are some benefits, there's some disadvantages, and how the two balance each other out. So we didn't want to get that. It's already confusing enough as is. We didn't want to start looking district wide and enrollment, increases. We just wanted to see just adding 440 students. What does that do to state aid? And just the assessed valuation from the RHID. What does that do to the mill levy and your bond and interest fund?
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think it's great information. It's very hard for me to only see this piece. I'd really love to hear Rob's view of it, because we aren't just growing in this one area. We have all of these other areas that we have to take into account. So to see this information, it looks like we break even, and I think that's great, but I'd love to know, is that the case? Like, how quickly does all of this happen? like we see a break even when they're complete, not in the in-between, right? The in-between, there's a little,
Yeah, and I'd mentioned that work closely with Mr. Schwinn on looking at this mill levy analysis, sometimes even multiple times during the year. And we'll talk through those assumptions of, enrollment, assessed valuation, what's happening in the district. Do we even have any property tax abatements from industrial revenue bonds that are falling off, and what will that do? And there's, you have, I'm fortunate to work with a number of school districts. You have as many variables impacting your mill levy as anybody I work with. And the growth does create those benefits and also challenges. It's tough to project where your mill levy will be because enrollment impacts state aid. State aid impacts the local tax levy. That growth, when does it hit the tax rolls? I mean, all of those things are, we look at a number of scenarios. And so if the board is ever interested in seeing a kind of a broader picture outside of just kind of focusing in on the RHID, we tend to look at that quite often because we're curious as well. And we can provide that information for the board if you're interested.
A couple of things that, because I didn't know what this was going to show. So that are kind of, I guess, positives. With you're talking about what's going on in the rest of the district, we're not going to be hindered on the tax revenue coming from those other parts of the district. So there's not going to be parts of our mill levy captured, at least at this point, in any of those other areas. So I think you do kind of have to isolate it to make a, to look at a decision on this. I do think the cap on the dollar amount or the year, whichever comes first, isn't that what you said? That is a protection for us. If there was a lot of inflationary things going on, they would reach that cap quicker than the year, and that would drop off. So I guess this is seems like a kind of a much better situation than maybe what I originally thought. And it seems like there's a good benefit to the community for it. So that's my
okay.
2 cents.
I want to make sure that I understand, because I think that it sort of makes sense what you're saying, Sharon, but looking at this, we're only seeing if we're not taking into account the other areas that we're seeing increased students, we're not really, that assessed valuation per pupil isn't really being captured correctly. So if we're seeing more students than 440, we're not actually seeing what that could be, along with if we're not taking into account the assessed valuation correctly from those other areas. So all of that, those are the 2 numbers that are helping calculate our state aid. So if we're only looking at this isolated area, we're only seeing what that 440 students and that assessed valuation could do to our current situation compared to if we look at it on a broader view. Is that correct?
Yeah, and so we pulled the assessed valuation per pupil numbers based upon your September enrollment off of the KSDE website, and that's what we used in our analysis. And that really is just a snapshot of right now for the district enrollment. And then we took that and said, okay, where we stand today, what happens if we add 440 students? And so that's the analysis we went through. But I think your comment is a good one, because it really gets to the point of trying to project what future state aid percentages will be for district wide. And that's impacted by more than just what's happening inside the RHID. And so we can take some of that data and Rob Schwartz is great at what he does, and his data is very helpful. And we can look at his projections and see what the projected enrollment of the district would be. And then how that impacts the pre-2015, that kind of that post-2015, and now even the new post-22. The question I have in the back of my mind is what does it take for the district to get back to getting state aid on an election, a future election that you have, and how close are we? How many students would it take Because then if you start getting state aid for bond elections moving forward, then that's gonna, the more state aid you get, less of a burden on the local taxpayers, and then that helps take pressure off that mill levy. But that's something we try to estimate. But it seems like every time we come up with an estimate that we feel good about, then you see a big growth or a new development occurring and more students coming in. So it's a little difficult to pin down that what it's going to look like 5-10 years out. But we can show certain growth percentages in your enrollment and then what that does to those 3 categories of state aid. I mean, that's a analysis that we can pull together for the district if you'd like to see that. And again, that's really looking kind of outside and beyond the RHID. It's more, given growth and developments that's occurring in the area, what are some of the, under certain assumptions, what will that state aid percentage look like? But happy to help with that calculation if that's something you want to see.
But if we grow, that more students come outside of the RHID, we grow, doesn't that also help our assessed value or our assessed valuation per pupil?
Yeah, growth
depending on the house, I guess.
Depend on the.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. It's because we're assuming that additional students are maybe coming from additional rooftops. That's increasing the assessed valuation, but now you have enrollment. And so we have to look at those two in tandem.
So it's stress on our facilities. In my head, it's more stress on our facilities rather than the assessed valuation piece. Because if we have 500 students coming in in the same time period from outside the RHID in 8 years, which is probably pretty reasonable, and 400 coming from within the RHID, that's 900 students in 8 years. Put the math to how many are elementary, how many are middle school, how many are high school, and then how does that stress our facilities? Right, I mean, the city's looking at the same thing because new people coming into the city stresses their facilities. I mean, this is. I mean, we could spin around for decades trying to figure this out down to a single number. I think you have to take the best information you have. But if gaining that information on the assessed valuation, it was from outside the RHID, I think that's what I heard you talking with Nicole about. How does that plug into what I'm struggling with is how that plugs into the RHID and how that impacts overall potential decisions on a very small part of the district.
Yeah, and that's why we tried not to complicate this discussion this evening with looking at some things that might happen outside the RHID. We're really trying to isolate just what are the impacts of the RHID on state aid and mill levy and that bond and interest fund. But then you start thinking about, the district as a whole and future growth. And is that future growth coming from additional rooftops? That's increasing assessed valuation, but it also, the students help on your state aid percentage. And then you start looking at, well, if you're not getting any state aid on future bond elections, then the best case scenario for the district is to have a lot of commercial or industrial growth where it's not putting stress on your facilities and forcing you to build new facilities, but you're seeing that tax base grow. So like I said, I'm fortunate to work with a lot of districts, and you guys have as many moving pieces as anybody I work with. And it really is kind of tough when we start looking at those scenarios with Doug of, well, what do we use for the growth rate? What do we do with the state aid? And you can see here, we're assuming let's just show hopefully a worst case scenario and show state aid declining like at 5% on your pre-2015 and declines on your post-2015. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we're projecting that will happen. And there's some things that could be really positive that if you have enrollment and maybe that pulls you up to a higher state aid percentage, or maybe you get some commercial development and that doesn't put as much strain on the system, but helps you increase the overall assessed valuation of the district, and you're spreading that bond payment over a larger tax base, which keeps the mill levy lower for all. But I wish I had the answer to all of these questions, because there's just, so many scenarios that you could think about. And
Or theoretical anyway, right? I mean,
yeah,
assumptions. So Nicole, I'm not sure I'm clear on what you're asking for.
No, I think he answered it, that we're looking at just this area, but if you start bringing in, if we weren't growing anywhere else, this I think would be exactly what we needed. But we are growing everywhere, and not just by a couple students or 20 students. We're growing by a lot more than this, sometimes outside of this RHID. So it's very hard to take this little baby snapshot and say, this is what's going to happen to our mill levy or our valuation or state aid, because there's these other big components that are attribute to all those numbers. So for us to look at this report and just say, this is pretty close to what's going to happen, we know that's not accurate.
We know that it's accurate for the RHID. We do know that. Anything outside of the RHID is what we would have to deal with on a normal basis. So the delta, the difference, the change is what the RHID would create. And so what it would create is based on these, and there's a lot of assumptions in here, are these results.
Yep, but what it's leaving out is additional students and additional evaluation. So really where we're seeing a net zero change, there's other components that are actually happening that we're not taking into account.
But those would happen anyway.
Those would happen anyway. You're right. Those would happen anyway. But we would get tax revenues on those.
Sure.
yeah, and I probably could have avoided some confusion if we would have put in a slide that just shows the differential between the two scenarios on the mill levy, because we're not, I don't want this to be a projection of where your mill levy will be and a projection that you're going to do bond issues of these sizes in those years. What we're really trying to calculate is what's that difference with and without the assessed valuation of the RHID. And like I said, I couldn't stop myself from putting in the detailed spreadsheets, but a comparison of the two mill levies side by side and just showing the difference each year would have probably been a simpler, less confusing way to do that. Because that's really what we were trying to calculate is, what's that difference just for the discussion now. And if you were thinking about a future project, then we would be taking a much more closer look at projections on state aid and assessed valuation growth outside the RHID, because that really becomes important where the overall mill levy is set. But again, just for tonight's meeting, we were trying to calculate what that difference would be.
I don't want to muddy the waters any more than they already are, but I'm curious as we're talking about opening our third middle school, and how close to capacity is Woodland Spring? It's not at capacity,
No,
right?
again, our capacity, because of the proactive stance the district has taken the past decade with their facilities. I mean, like I said, our current, like I said, for instance, right now, Dayton Creek Elementary School, which is would be the main elementary school for this particular RHID. They are currently this year, which again, they're a new school, so what's this about? They're about 210 students below capacity. We will be opening our third middle school next August. And again, when Rob comes in January, he's going to bring, his updated demographics, but based on current numbers, which again, we're looking for the future. And so, we know when you open a facility, you're not going to be at capacity. You don't want to be at near capacity, but we will be, each middle school will be has a capacity right at 500, a little over 500, but we use 500. All three middle schools next fall right now are projected to be right around the 300 mark. So we have, capacity at each of those three facilities. because of the fact that we also at our other elementary schools, we do have a couple elementary schools that are nearing capacity. Okay, but we kind of had that in our long-term plans in-house about if and when the time came where how we would address that. And we've got some plans that, again, when we get to that point, we start, we would be looking at that. But no one likes to hear either, but even as depending on because we have capacity at our middle schools, we've got capacity overall at most of our elementary schools at this point. You could also, which no one likes to do, but you could at some point, if you had to do a little bit of redrawing boundaries at times to make things a little bit even, but capacity wise right now, because of, again, your long-term vision for the future, we do have good capacity. Now, again, we've also have talked internally at options about that would, we are, the high school has a capacity of around 12 or 1,300, depending on how you define capacity and programs and how many students you put in each class throughout the day. But we have a little bit of room still there to grow, but there's some other options we've been looking at internally that if we got to that point where we really needed space, there are some options that I think as we get into, as Mr. Greg Vonberg has alluded to several times tonight about, we have already kind of plugged in some numbers on possible ballot issue questions that could come up in the next 5 to 7 years that would address, different channels, different avenues, depending on which way enrollment goes and where we need space. But like we said, as he said, and as there's just so many moving parts. Right now, we're trying to just focus on, because, with the city on the RHID and its impact, with us as well as, long-term. And it is a project that you truly have to look at far into the future, because we really will not see much impact from this in terms of revenue either way for 3 or 4 years. It's going to take, by the time they get the infrastructure run, get the homes built, get some people, it's not just going to happen. We're not going to see any increase by August of this next school. It's going to be a slope, and that's part of the reason why it's such a long time frame. But that's but to answer back to the initial question, the capacity at our middle schools next year will be right around the 300 mark, maybe a little less. And then at Dayton Creek Elementary, which feeds the RHID this year, I think we're at like around 230, 240, somewhere in that neighborhood.
I think to tie into that, I had to talk to you, Doug. Someone told me that right now at Dayton Creek, there are 26 students from the Dayton Creek subdivision.
They're right in the low 20s from grades K through 5 that actually live in the Dayton Creek boundaries out of that high 100 number of homes that are built.
So yeah, and that's how long they've been building that subdivision. That's been a while. So
and
and there's two positive things nobody's touched on. We're looking at 41 acres of parkland, and that commercial with it, I mean, it's ready to go. If somebody wants to come in there and build something, you have instant revenue from that, and it's a great location. So we've got 2 buildings going up across the street. We get them in and they'll look across the road and go, we want to be here too. So that's 2 positives we haven't really talked about.
Well, I don't think that we would ever apologize for planning ahead, and there's no way any of us could have seen what we've had the last 2 or 3 years come to us. So it's all kind of that crystal ball stuff that you just try and do the best job that you can. And it sometimes presents other opportunities that come along the way. So anyway, thank you for.
You're welcome. Thank you.
We need to make sure that Nicole's question is resolved.
Yeah, no, he answered my questions well.
Okay.
I had one other question about RHID, and is if there's other options for the district, other options for the district rather than being all in with those with all of it for however many years? Like, are we able to put limits on years that we're willing to concede those tax revenues? Like, what, are there any other options?
Is it all or nothing? That's probably more a question for the city or the city's attorney, so I'll let them answer.
I'm happy to answer that. And we certainly took a close look at that, both from the city's perspective and in consultation with the developers' attorneys. And the language of the statute, the RHID Act is fairly clear. And it basically says either the captured mill levies are in or they're not. And so either the district is in place or it's not. There aren't the kind of nuances that I think we all hoped we might be able to explore. And so the simple answer is it's not supported in the statute. Could the statute change in the future to have carve outs and things like that? That's anyone's guess. And I think that this will continue to be a focus of the legislature. But at this time, there's not those kinds of options built into the statute.
Thank you.
I would add on to Brent, I think there's other intangible positive things to this as well. I do think there's other things. It's, if you look at just the dollars and cents of it, and it's not a massive impact to the district, that's one thing. But I think there's other intangibles that are positive from this kind of a thing as well. So, but we have to just take into account the potential revenue impact. That was my concern. And just based on the model that you built that has inherent assumptions into it, one of decreasing state aid, which is probably a good assumption. It's best we can do for right now with the information we have right now. We can always reserve the right to be smarter tomorrow, but than we are today. But anyway, I just wanted to say I do think there's other intangibles that are positives to a partnership like this. But
I agree. I didn't realize that it was an act. So if you want to look up Senate Bill 90, the Kansas Department of Commerce has a real nice website explaining in detail more about it. So.
Any other questions for Mr. Verenberg? Thank you very much, Greg. Appreciate the work you've done and the guidance you've given us information for. So
Happy to help. Thank you.
You did mention something about an additional slide with just showing the delta. Would that be a major effort?
I said that would have saved a lot of discussion if I just laid the mill levy kind of with and without. So I learned my lesson. Next time I'll keep it simple.
Is that a hard thing to put together?
No, not at all. I can send that out.
Okay, that'd be great.
Sure.
you could send it to Candy and then she can distribute it to the board or Dr. Luttrell, you know.
Okay, perfect.
Or if you want to work with Doug and he can, however you work it, I think the board, it'd be good for the board to see it.
We'll get it to you in the morning.
There you go.
Okay.
Thank you. Good
Thank you again.
discussion. Moving on to the superintendent evaluation forms, Dr. Luttrell.
Okay, yes, and the part of the work session on the 29th was also, on the 19th was also to continue work on the development of the superintendent evaluation template. I thought there was good discussion in the brief time that we had, or that you all had, to put that together. And what you accomplished, I think, at the end of that brief period, was identifying those main categories. And then you're now at the point where you're ready to develop, your subcategories under each category. And because of after the 19th, there was not a lengthy work week last week because of the holiday, and our communications department, myself, have not had time to get together and actually roll that into a document form to get it to a format that you all can take it up again from a discussion standpoint. I hope to have that. That should be ready, hopefully, for you to start looking at among yourselves sometime, around that December 12th meeting date. And then again, we can bring that back, or you all can choose to bring that back or give me direction on how you would like to have that then move forward to continue advancing it so that it is ready to go, hopefully sometime, before summer or late spring. So that's kind of where we're with that.
Trying to remember the questions. Were those from the Nels, do you remember if it was from the North Carolina or the Massachusetts model? Or the Washington?
The rubrics.
Not the categories, but the actual questions, subcategories, the subcategories and the questions.
North
The
Carolina.
rubric was North Carolina.
Yeah, that whole
Right.
table with all the criteria. That was North Carolina.
Okay. All right, so Candy, can you pull in those categories? We have these primary categories: instructional leadership, strategic leadership, management operations, and district culture that includes family, community, and professional. Can you pull the North Carolina rubric and the questions associated with, or the subcategories associated with that into a single document? And then send that to the board and use that as a model template. And that's when everybody gets to get out a red pen and do the rubric.
Yeah, I think we'll do that with Christopher when he gets back, because I think he's going to be the one who's going to be really working with Dr. Luttrell on that, but I can definitely get it pulled and make sure that Christopher has that.
Yeah, I think that was the vision that we concluded at.
Okay.
So, and then that gets us out of the Massachusetts, other than the process, because the Massachusetts process, I just muddied the waters. So the Massachusetts example that we'll benchmark, the process is the upfront part of the evaluation. Then we have the categories that we've agreed on. And then to pull under those categories would be the North Carolina evaluation that we'll benchmark. And so that creates the process, the evaluation criteria, and then the evaluation criteria. And that gets us one single document that we can noodle.
I will work on it.
Thank you. I think that moves things forward. If everyone's in agreement, if we have a consensus on that, I guess everyone think that's a decent road to start down. Okay. All right, very good. Any other comments or questions around the superintendent evaluation? All right, moving on to superintendent's update, Dr. Luttrell.
Yes, just a few items. The next session of the board, just a reminder, will be the December 12th meeting, and that is the annual meeting where there is a start time of 4:30, and we try to get, or it's been told to me anyway, that the meeting try to stay brief so that evening members of the board, if they choose, can have opportunity to go attend some of our holiday programs. I know we have at least 2 scheduled across the district that evening. So we'll keep the meeting relatively brief on that meeting on the 12th. And also was a reminder that because of the holiday in December, that is the only meeting for December. There will not be a second meeting at this time. That being said, coming back today from the Thanksgiving holiday, the first semester's flown by and it's winding down. And as I said, with a lot of programs and things, it's coming fast and furious. And we will conclude on Tuesday, the 22nd. So we have right at 16 school days remaining between now and the end of the semester. You've heard me talk throughout the semester about our PLC, Professional Learning Community Initiative, which I think does play a hand in our student achievement. This is the 4th year. We've talked about now's the time to really get feedback from parents and staff to see if it's meeting what we feel are the intended goals that were had for the initiative when it was implemented back in the 2019-20 school year. So we did release a survey, we did draft a survey, and we did actually put that survey out to parents and staff on November 16th. Right before Thanksgiving, we had approximately well over close to 600 responses to that survey. And it's going to remain open through Wednesday of this week, the 30th. And then we'll sit down and start looking at those results. We will bring those results back and let you all see all of them, including the feedback that was received. And then at sometime probably in February, late January, Dr. Smith and I, and probably, a few others will come and review some of the data and make some recommendations possibly of how maybe we might feel that there might be some tweaks to make that could make the collaborative Wednesdays and PLC initiative even stronger. But again, there's still time to complete that survey from parents and staff if they haven't done so. And then you've heard me talk all semester. I know many people in the audience helped me out and were part of this. You all were part of it, helping me get acclimated into USD 230 here in Spring Hill. And I have, even though I'm on like day 145 now, my 100-day summer report, I've got through my writer's block. I've got the draft. It's now in basically booklet form. And I still plan probably to have that as my Christmas gift to you all on the 12th. Okay, you all will have some holiday reading, but I'm looking forward to having that out because I do think that's going to provide, at least from my perspective, bringing feedback that I heard from a myriad of stakeholders, some things that I feel we should probably try and merge, see what themes can be merged into our strategic plan. And Dr. Smith and Dr. Robinson and I have talked, and we think it's going to work out well because we just finished year 5 of our KISA cycle accreditation cycle. We're waiting that final report that Dr. Smith will share what our official accreditation is, probably hopefully at the first of the year. But so next school year, we'll actually start a new 5-year cycle. So our plan or our goal is we think the timing is right, that we can take some of the key themes from our 100-day report and kind of merge it and roll it into with some modifications and formatting into our strategic plan. If you remember when the strategic plan was initially approved, it went through 28, which was like a 7-year cycle, which is not a bad thing, but most of them are set up for a 5-year cycle. So by the time we roll out the 100-day plan, bring some themes that we feel maybe agree upon should be rolled into it as maybe points of emphasis into our strategic plan. And then our leadership team and building leadership teams and school leadership teams write up their goals and strategies for that. And we get that completed by the start of our school year, 23-24 next year. That'll put us aligned with the 5-year cycle for the whole KISA. So again, I think it's all going to roll together very well. So that's my superintendent's report.
Very good. Thank you. Items on the horizon.
And again, I'm not going to go through all of them. I mentioned previous meetings, but we're going to be very busy the next, especially after January. Like I said, you'll have, the PLC update information, my listen and learn report. Dr. Smith will actually be here in December asking as just a item of discussion. It will not be decided until January. But, the world of curriculum and teaching and learning never ends. And the instructional resource recommendation she'll be bringing for the new English language arts reading curriculum for grades K-5. And then, she'll make those, a lot of those materials available and would be an actual consent item at the January date. We also hope that we can have, as I said, I'm looking into, I think, again, as we continue to grow, the tiered busing is something we got to at least look at, especially with the 3rd middle school coming on board, especially with the fact that our bus company contract is also up at this time at the end of this year. So now's the time to at least look at that to see if it's an option. As I said, with the shortage of drivers, even for private contractors, it's a challenge. And we are, again, not that, and it's a good thing, but USD 230 is one of the last remaining districts that has been able to hold on to the a true single tiered system. But again, I just think now is the time to at least look at it and see what could be done, because there are some trade-offs, both positive and not so positive, that need to be examined in addition to cost savings. So we'll be having that information. We also will have our health professionals coming and doing an update on what they feel, a program that they've taken on in the last year and a half with Project Adams certification at all of our schools. We also have an update from Dr. Smith, Dr. Robinson, our real world learning grant initiative through the Kaufman Foundation that also aligns well with our strategic plan. And we hope that by late winter, we'll bring to you a timeline of how we would like to allocate our grant allocations that we have available over the next 3 years. In the last several months, Dr. Robinson, Dr. Smith, and several teachers have spent time focused trying to develop a timeline and been outgoing, seeing what other districts, not only within Kansas, but across, and some of them have visited other states to see what's going on there and how they're addressing the real world learning opportunities. So we're going to get really speed up that initiative and get you information on that. And then, as we said, also in January, we've got that work session on that 5th Monday, where again, I did speak with Rob Schwartz even last week early before Thanksgiving and asked him again, was there any way that he could have his newest data sets ready to go earlier? And he just said no. I mean, he said there's just too many variables, and he didn't want to rush it to and then give us bad data. So he is still on the calendar to come on the January 30th work session and give us his latest insights about what we should be seeing is, across the next 10, 15 years in terms of enrollment. Because he said the conversation I had with him back in October was, even from last spring and March, some things that have come out on this side of the pandemic now that just haven't, again, the projection thought process, the way it was, hasn't materialized. And it's been more than a single year. And so does feel he's going to bring some revised projections. To what extent, I don't know. One thing I did ask him to address last week that he does plan to work into his report this time, because it's come up sometimes in this as a board, that I think that I've tried to get a handle on and I've struggled with a little bit, but it is going to try to answer the question more clearly as determined of this USD 230 school district, how many addresses, how many patrons, how many households, truly in terms of the Spring Hill, Miami County, Spring Hill, Johnson County, Spring Hill address, kind of really give us a breakdown of just not student-wise one, but also just number of people-wise. So we can kind of, because I know that comes up, well, so-and-so has this many, and I would like myself to have a good handle. So he added that to his list as well. And then, because as we said, we got to take a lot of those things into account, especially as we start planning, as Greg referred to. There's still out there the possibility of options, even in those calculations, that would withstand, some bond ballot questions in both 25 and 27, but depending on what Rob says and depending on what our trends are, those timelines could be adjusted out further, possibly. So that'll be interesting to see what he brings us in January. So again, we're going to be busy. So rest up and with that only one meeting in December. That's all I have.
Very good. Any questions or comments? We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.